Good morning. My name is Nas Yadollahi. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the president of QP Local 79. I represent approximately 30,000 workers who work for the City of Toronto and take care of our city. We look after our children and our most vulnerable residents. Our members work in the city's shelter systems, take care of our loved ones in our public long-term care homes, run our recreation programs to ensure youth across Toronto have access to low-barrier programming, tend to our children across the city's daycares, and so much more. I first started working for the City of Toronto in 1999 and have spent the past 2 decades as a youth outreach worker in various neighborhoods around the city, including Driftwood, Crescent Town, and most recently, St. Jamestown. As a worker and a health and safety representative with our union, I have seen firsthand how decades of austerity have impacted our city and its services. Gone are the days when youth used to line up around the block to get a green City of Toronto t-shirt to work as a lifeguard or to help run recreation centers in their communities. Now we hear from general managers at the city that retention is an issue due to low pay and how programs are being canceled because positions can't be filled. 20 years ago, I lost my brother to gun violence. And it was my work as a youth outreach worker that solidified my belief that safety is rooted in community-based approach. So I want to start today by recommending that the Budget Committee further consider investments in our city's safety by expanding city-run recreation programs to make them more accessible and more universal. Safety cannot just be addressed when someone is already in crisis. It has to be thought about proactively with access to space and workers who can make young people feel heard and seen. I come to this table today as a worker who has worked in a climate of austerity. It is refreshing and positive to see a budget that begins the process of investing in our services and in the workers who deliver them. Our members are encouraged by the investments in the positions in direct care that will be hired to help increase the service levels in our long-term care homes. Our long-term care workers, the backbones and beating hearts of our homes, have worked tirelessly throughout the pandemic and continue being leaders in their field. I want to thank them, and I look forward to seeing more colleagues join their ranks. During COVID closures, when recreation centers were only open for washroom and shower access, I met Harry, a Toronto resident who is unhoused. Harry lives downtown and uses city facilities daily. He has kids and is able to work over the summer, but only sometimes, and struggles with his mental health. This winter, I helped him find some warm clothes, and I know that he and all the residents who are street involved have had a really difficult month because of the brutal cold. I'm very happy to note the increased funds allocated towards shelters to help my friend Harry and other residents who need access to shelter. Taking care of Toronto's most vulnerable residents is the responsibility of everyone in our city. Our members, City Council, and the Mayor. By creating more beds and shelter spaces and opening warming centers faster, we can collectively start to create a safer and more caring city like we committed to. I would be remiss if, in addressing the shelter crisis, I did not talk about the elephant in the room. The federal government must take responsibility for the cost of shelter for refugees who arrive in Toronto and have nowhere to stay. Prime Minister Trudeau, his cabinet, and members of parliament who represent ridings in the City of Toronto have surely seen the shelter crisis firsthand. The City of Toronto has stepped up in many ways to address this crisis. Now it's time for the federal government to pay their fair share. I know that many folks in Toronto, including some of our members, are concerned about the increase in residential property taxes, especially at a time when inflation is high and wages are not keeping up. I also know that the climate of austerity created by successive previous mayors and city councils have created an unsustainable situation, pitting our need for universally accessible services against our collective ability to be able to pay for them. The tax increase boils down to an average of a few $100s a year, a surmountable amount for most property owners. In these tough financial times, those of us who can have to pull together and dig a little bit deeper to continue to build a city we are all proud of. For our members, investing in city services and creating positions that support these services is non-negotiable. It's the only way to make the city sustainable and truly accessible for all of its residents. I want to commend the mayor and city staff for putting together a budget that does not cut services. I hope that as the Budget Committee proceeds to make recommendations to the mayor, and she in turn puts together her first budget, we continue to see an emphasis of care. Budgeting is about making choices. QP Local 79 members stand behind the choice to expand our critical services and create positions that support these services. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. It sounded like you were wrapping up, so I just let that finish. Are there any questions to the deputy? Councillor Candeval.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you, Nas, for the presentation. Though I wasn't here physically present, I was watching from, and I appreciate your presentation, including sharing of your personal tragic story involving your brother. It is something that we've seen perhaps too common in our public spaces in our city. In 2022, when I was trustee, we sadly had 2 homicides, youth homicides on TDSB property, which we hadn't seen for 15 years prior. I think many in the room will remember the rightful public outcry for supports following the untimely and tragic homicide of Jordan Manners in the northwest part of the city, which fostered important conversations.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be insensitive when on such a serious topic, but you do need to get to your question. I actually accidentally started your clock late.
Okay,
Yeah.
I hope you're consistent in that request, and context is important for a
100%.
conversation about city services. So I hope you're. I hope you're. Okay, I'll get to the question then.
Just a word in here, 100% consistent. When we're doing Q&A, we're supposed to leave our preambles to a minimum to allow as much time as possible for our guests to answer. Sorry if that hasn't been made clear to you as a brand new councillor.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Carroll. We haven't seen the same attention following those 2 tragic incidents from the city in the time following. Social services, youth workers play critical, recreation programs play a critical role, and completely support the context of your presentation. As part of not only increasing service, we have to look at redistribution of community recreation programs. The data in our city is very clear. Higher SES neighborhoods enjoy more services community recreation-wise. Is it your position, do you think, as part of not just increased service and programming, do we have to look at redistribution of programmings by race, space, and SES?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we should definitely consider is community-based programming based on the needs of communities. I think what has been happening is we are seeing more and more programming that is structured exactly the same throughout and offered throughout to create some kind of consistency. You're absolutely right. We need to do more community needs-based programming. And I would actually go further and say that the state of good repair in some of the communities that you're talking about is dire. And we really do need to pay attention to some of those spaces and how we're lending into those communities equitably.
Thank you. So just to confirm, do you think it's important that we operate looking at redistribution of community programs based on equity, based on need, based on demographic data like race, space, and geography?
I think we need to increase programming, not redistribute.
But in the light of, even with the proposed budget, that only gives us certain context and ability to maneuver in terms of increased programming. As an additional tool, should we not, if we're a progressive and equitable city and actually living to our commitments, should that not include redistribution of current existing programs?
I absolutely think it's something worth looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions of the deputy? Councillor Perks?
Thank you so much, and congratulations to your recent election. I'm just wondering, I've had a lot of conversations over the years with, people from the job classification you come from, recreation workers. And one of the things I always hear in the conversation is more and more city facilities, libraries, recreation centers are having to pick up the slack as people lose housing, lose food support programs, and so on. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, I think any counselor who wants to see a real-time account of what our frontline workers are having to, and got library workers in the room as well, what we're having to work with on a daily basis is walk into Wellesley Community Center. You will see that our unhoused friends are accessing the spaces. There's members of the community that are accessing the space, which also has changed the work of our frontline workers. And so I think perhaps it's time that we reevaluate and look at what these centers are sort of what they're holding, right? It's no longer just a space that offers community recreation programs. It's a space that's actually housing people because our other systems are not able to keep up. Our shelter systems can't keep up.
So from that, my sense is that increasingly city services are having to backstop the collapse, frankly, of our social assistance system, of our housing system, of our settlement services. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any others with questions? Seeing none, I'm just going to start the clock on myself because I have a question on myself. But we can just go back to the issue of how we target programming. You would be probably aware of this as president. We do have a place-based strategy. That's how we choose where the priority community centers are. That's where the neighborhood improvement areas are. But I don't know if you're familiar with the fact that there are a whole host of neighborhoods, and it's funny you should raise Wellesley Community Center as an example. St. Jamestown is one. The Peanut in my ward is one. There are a couple of neighborhoods in Scarborough. There are a couple of neighborhoods in Etobicoke that were meant to be the next phase of neighborhood improvement areas, but then the next phase never came. We have reports asking for them to be analyzed, but we don't have the funds to designate them as neighborhood improvement areas. And it's for that reason that recreation and some other services have had to make some things universal across low-income neighborhoods that don't have the exalted designation of neighborhood improvement area. You know the juxtaposition of those two strategies? Or
I do. I work intimately in those neighborhood improvement areas as a youth worker. I'm very familiar. There's 31 of them. I think that whatever way that we're using to evaluate these spaces, perhaps we need to relook at those things. I don't think there's enough programming, so maybe it's an expansion of programming.
Yes, that's my question.
Right.
Are you aware that the reason we're doing some stretch programming across other neighborhoods is because we don't have the money to add neighborhood improvement areas? Were you aware of that?
No, I was not.
Okay. I was just wondering if that balance, perhaps those decisions taken so long ago, it's now 5 years since Wellesley Community Center area, St. Jamestown and the Peanut were supposed to be added, and still no news. So maybe we need to communicate that those are waiting in the queue. Oh, okay, thank you. That's helpful. That's very helpful. Councillor Moyes?
Again, congrats on your new position. So you did use Wellesley Community Center as an example of the stresses and the changes to the job. Do you know if we actually keep stats on what type of clientele come into that space? For example, those who are under house looking for shelter. Do you have that information at all?
I can tell you because I've worked there. Whether or not we keep stats, we do not keep statistics. It would be hard to keep a statistic in terms of, again, what I'm trying to stress here is we really need to consider what our frontline workers who are getting paid $16.60 an hour are having to do now, right? They are no longer just sitting at a desk responding to folks who are inquiring about programming. They are facilitating a different kind of space. So I'm not really sure who would keep those statistics. I don't know if the suggestion is that those workers who are already dealing on a multitude of levels with community are also having to keep tabs on those statistics. I'm sure there's a way. It hasn't been done until now. I know there would be quite a few.
I mean, the reason I'm asking is just because it give us a better understanding as to how we can actually help, not only those who need help, but those who are actually working there, and how we can support them, and that's why I'm asking.
No, absolutely. I think the city's aware of the folks that are using these spaces. I think maybe, again, I'll go back to, I think, reevaluating these sites over time to see what they have actually become because of this. The state of the city and what has happened over the decades is also reflective in our spaces, right? So going back and reevaluating and seeing what do these spaces actually hold now? And then are the trainings that we're offering adequate? Is the pay that we're offering adequate? I think these spaces look entirely different than when I started in the city in 1999.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think those are the questions. Thank you for coming. Yeah. Okay, I have Susan Wright next from the summer lunch program. Yeah.